Oh.
To make skexy sounds.
Is that what we're going to call them? Skexy?
Skexy-esque sounds. Don't tell me you haven't seen The Dark Crystal. You haven't seen The Dark Crystal.
Is that the one with David Bowie?
No, that's The Labyrinth. The Dark Crystal's puppets. It's a Jim Henson puppet movie.
Then I don't think so.
Oh my gosh. Gosh, I know what we're doing for your birthday.
That's right. You know, a few weeks from now, we create these several weeks in advance. So my birthday is in mid-March. So,
well, happy birthday.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
You are less baby than you were yesterday.
This is true. And every day after this, I will continue to become less baby.
Less baby, but always baby. Still.
Always. Yes. I will always, you will constantly be finding things that I have not done in my life.
Yep. That's fine. Justin and I tell Ikenna that they're an infant because we feel old by comparison.
Yeah.
Even though we're only 5 and 6 years older, respectively.
Yep. I don't know what it is. I mean, 5 years is it's a pretty large gap, especially in terms of like internet stuff.
Yeah. It's like 1 year now will make just a massive difference in a generation. Mm-hmm. Like little ripples.
We should shut that.
Should we shut that?
Yeah, because I'm hearing echo. There we go.
Are you content now?
Yeah, it sounds much better in here.
All right, so back to...
I'm baby.
You are baby. Happy birthday.
I am less baby, but still baby.
But still baby. And because it's your birthday, you get to pick the topic for today.
That's so much pressure, though.
So just close your eyes and make a wish and stab your screen with a finger.
Wow. Okay.
And whatever it lands on. That's the topic of the day.
Okay. Well, let's see.
No pressure.
No pressure.
No pressure if you just, tap one.
Podcast topics. Okay. Boundaries and what we were taught as kids.
Oh, boy.
Feeling responsible for our own and our parents' feelings.
Oh, boy. We were literally just talking about this in the car.
Yeah.
Because I was talking about my mom.
Yep.
Yeah. Where do we even start with this? We have very different childhoods in this way.
Well, okay. So, since I'm the one that edits the podcasts, I get to listen through some of our rants and talks and how we say things. And first I want to talk about boundaries in general, because boundary is kind of that hot button word that people are overusing now because they don't exactly understand what a boundary could mean. And ultimately, the boundaries in the most basic form is, something that you need in order to be safe and protect yourself. Safriano, of course, has been, has created different trainings on this stuff. So I don't know why I'm the one that's explaining it. How about I feel like you're the one that definitely can say it in a more, I don't know. You can explain it better.
Well, I think you were explaining it fine for where you were going. I mean, even my own definition of boundaries is constantly changing. And I think it's firming up now, but it's been a conversation that I've been having for years with clients and with myself. Mm-hmm. But Boundaries are the things that we draw around ourselves. Why? I'm never this close to the microphone.
You are. You need to. Because I'm this close to the microphone, and then it's our voices. I have to do so much in post.
Ugh.
I have schoolwork to do, Safriana.
I'm going to be dramatic.
Yep.
Okay. Anyway.
I'm sorry that the microphone is within your boundary.
It is. It's in my bubble.
It is.
I need to connect to the microphone. Give me a moment.
Are we naming the microphone?
No, I'm just connecting with it energetically.
Okay, yeah.
So that it can be in my space.
Oh, okay.
Boundaries. Boundaries are what we draw around ourselves to protect ourselves, like you were saying. It's not really about other people. It's about what we will and won't accept in our purview, in our region, in our bubble, in our space, in our energy field.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to call it. Like, there are people who like to say things like, well, I don't have a choice. A lot. And if you're there, I feel for you because I've been there.
Same.
Big time.
Yeah.
But we always have a choice, at least as adults. Like, as children, unfortunately, legally, we are not allowed to make certain choices, which is awful if you have caregivers who are not actually taking care of you. But once you're an adult, legally, you get full rights to determine how you spend your time, where you spend your time, who you spend your time with, etc., unless you are in a coercive situation, which can limit some things.
Which, I mean, that's a huge thing that people fight for anyway, in terms of, like, the laws controlling.
It's 11/11 on March 11th. I just needed to let you know.
Okay.
Carry on.
Thank you.
Bless.
Heck.
Heck.
So, but that's what laws struggle with a lot of times, is they want to control people's own autonomy, and based off of, you know, if, for example, thankfully, President Biden had stuff to say about different states making laws against trans kids and LGBTQIA kids. But these states are, you know, wanting to place their own level of discomfort on an entire population instead of placing boundaries on their own. Like, they don't have to be participating in those things that make them uncomfortable. Like, if you don't want to have gay marriage, don't go to a gay wedding. Don't become gay married. So that just kind of led me into that rabbit hole, because if we are in charge of our own stuff and we do have more of a choice, societal lawmaking makes us believe otherwise as well.
Right.
Which is unfortunate.
And, you know, based on something you just said, I wanted to remind you, Ikenna, that if you go to a gay wedding, you're going to become gay. Like, you will be infected with the gay.
Infected.
It's
all part of the agenda. We don't wear masks to gay weddings for that reason. I'm just kidding. Sorry.
But anyway, and that's, and I know we've come back to the topic of fear a couple of times already, but we have these insane, what we think are boundaries, which sometimes are really just prejudices and biases and bigotry.
Yeah.
But it all comes down to, we have them because of fear. We have them because of generational trauma, of cultural wounds that put one group of people in power, and because they weren't in power before, they're terrified to use it, or to lose it rather. And it just becomes a vicious cycle. Like we Americans came over here originally, the colonizers.
Yep.
To the English colonizers came over here to make a new way for themselves.
Yep.
Because they were trying to flee a situation that they didn't like.
Yeah.
But then in the process, they killed and pillaged and oppressed and enslaved and infected a bunch of other people in the process. And that is not how boundaries work.
Nope.
We don't force our boundaries onto other people. Physically, emotionally, spiritually, financially, etc. That's not how boundaries work. Boundaries are us controlling our behavior and what we accept.
Yep. And that's I think I might have referenced this in another episode, I'm unsure. But my very first therapist that I had was explaining to me that, our rights stop where others begin, sort of thing. So just because you want to claim, discomfort or claim your rights on something else, if that's causing someone else to be unsafe, that's going to be an issue.
Right.
Like, I mean, there's so many different examples to that we could probably think of, but that's another thing about boundaries.
So I know the original topic was the parental role in boundaries, and you've spoken on the issue that we have with talking freely about our parents and the need to be responsible for their feelings.
Right.
But I think for me, I was probably about 26, 27 when I started to realize I could finally have a boundary that said I am not going to spend time around people who are toxic towards me.
Right.
Or people who do not respect my name. Because that was about the age when I legally changed my name. I'm not going to spend time with or talk to people who disrespect my identity. And so that looked like cutting my dad out of my life after he said some very harmful things, which I realized our third person in this podcast is my dad's ashes in the closet.
Hi, Sappy's dad.
Hi, Dad. Yeah, you were not great with respecting my boundaries.
You just talked to him directly.
Yeah, but like my mom got cut out too for a time because I told her, like, if you are not going to be able to respect that this is me and this is who I am and it is my life, not yours, then I'm not going to engage with you. And she pushed the line.
Right.
I said, this is my boundary. I am going to remove myself.
Right.
If you continue to do that. That's how we have our boundaries with other people. We make a request. Mom, I am only going to be around people who respect my name. Are you willing to use my name?
Yeah. But the boundary is not, the boundary is about what you will do if that request is or is not respected.
Correct. Yeah. So there's nuance in it because we do think, well, people can violate our boundaries.
Absolutely. Because
people can do something against our will. So I'm trying to think of something that's not super duper triggery, but
hugging grandma.
Well, I was going to say something that is forced on you, maybe without you knowing or without your explicit consent. Like somebody says, I am vegan. I will only eat non-animal products.
Mm-hmm.
And then your friend comes over and is like, oh, I made you this casserole. And you say, okay, is it vegan? Because I only eat vegan food. And they're like, yeah, it is. And then you eat the casserole and you notice a funny feeling in your mouth. And you're like, huh, what's this? And your friend goes, ha, it's real cheese. I thought you would like to try this real cheese this time. And you can't tell the difference. But the reality is that this person is like highly allergic to dairy, which led them to the vegan path in the first place. And now you have perhaps unknowingly, but after they stated a boundary, like actually physically violated them in that way, because they said, I only eat this diet. And then you forced them by lying to them to eat something that they would not choose to eat for themselves. And you can apply this to other far more triggery situations that people will do things to us against our will.
I mean, we can always do that, the tea skit.
Yeah. Yes.
Even
link
though
link to the tea skit below.
Yeah. The whole, like, if they ask for a cup of tea and you make the cup of tea and then you go to give them the cup of tea and they're like, just kidding, I changed my mind, I don't want the cup of tea anymore. You do not force them to have that cup of tea.
Right. Like, so we can violate others' boundaries, but for the most part, we have just the power of requests.
Mm-hmm. We also have to have, sorry.
Oh, no, go for it.
I was also thinking of the fact that we have the power. We ultimately need to understand that if we set a boundary around one friend, if we haven't explicitly set that boundary with another person, not everyone's going to automatically know our boundaries.
Yes.
So you're going to have to keep setting them.
We have to communicate what is and is not acceptable to us. And we also need to not assume things to be true about everyone else. It's really good to err on the side of asking or requesting. Mm-hmm. Requests are number one way of communicating. Are you willing to do this with me? Is this something you're interested in?
Right.
Like, do you want to do this with me right now? Do you want me to do this with you later? Like, we can ask questions, but we often don't. And going back to the parenthood piece, like, so many kids are not given choices or requests from their parents. It's demands. It's because I said so. Because I'm the parent. Now,
that's the thing too is, I have talked to several parents that are definitely changing those narratives and how they treat their kids. And there's a lot of parents that are going down the route of this thing called gentle parenting, which looks more permissive than what people are used to. And a lot of times people are like, your only experience as a parent is witnessing your parents parent you, usually. And maybe some babysitting stuff that you've attempted as a kid. But for the most part, the only thing that you can really base your own parenting off of is those different skills that you've tried to learn from in terms of your own childhood and realizing what you might want or not want in your parenting style, reading up on books, all that sort of stuff. And then when your kid comes, because, you can't possibly know what your kid's going to be like when they grow up. Mm-hmm. So as much as you would like to, you want them to be their own person ultimately. But at the same time, sometimes when the parents are stressed and placed in a position where they need to react for their kid's safety or because the kid's doing something that reminds them of something that their parents did when they were a kid or something that triggers a sense of panic or anxiety or something, they will resort to kind of like a split-second decision of, the because I said so, or just lingo that they've heard to kind of try to bring the kid back into obeying them or listening. Because sometimes if you're just at the sense of like, no one's listening to me, what do I do? It can lead to that space of panic. And I mean, I've lived that as a substitute teacher in a place where 25 kids, half of them are running around the room not wanting to listen. and I'm finding myself get more and more upset and not able to provide the level of attunement that I want with the kids, and we're all amping each other up, and it's just, so I feel for people that are like, I want to be perfect 100% of the time as a parent, and that's not, no one's expecting that of you as much as society judges you for all of your parenting styles.
Right. I mean, I just had a great conversation with a client who's a parent about, they basically came to me and admitted, like, my relationship with one of my kids isn't the greatest right now because I find myself getting to that edge very quickly. And she wanted my feedback on it. And we basically came up with a game plan to talk to the kid and apologize and say, I realize that I get to this point. And they had that conversation, and it opened so much up between them because that's showing ownership that we're human and have a full range of experiences and emotions. And when kids see that, and they see adults managing their own boundaries, because really, I'm not a person that wants to go off on people.
Right.
So that's a boundary for me internally. We have these sort of internal and external facing boundaries. But the internal boundary looks like I'm going to need to keep myself calm, or I'm going to need to remove myself.
Right.
And come back to a conversation later when I can be level-headed. So we're obviously going to cross our own boundaries sometimes. That's a
hard
struggle.
Yeah, but that's our own choice, because there are some times where we might be uncomfortable in a party situation, or that's basically what exposure therapy practices try to do, is be like, you're going to be uncomfortable. Your internal, feelings are going to be hard. So we're going to slowly introduce this to your system. And then, eventually, after you are feeling okay thinking about it, then we might expose you to it, like in person, go through all of these different steps of that. But it's you consenting to the fact that you want to try that thing. And in the end, and it takes a while too. Exposure therapy is it can be an overnight process for some people, but a lot of times it can take many weeks, many months. And even after those many months, you're still hating that thing, or you're a little less freaked out by it, but you're still struggling with it. It's okay to still have that boundary of being like, okay, I'm just not ever really going to be super comfortable with this, and I need to remove myself when I get to that point. And you can find other things about you that are much more comfortable than that thing. You don't have to bend yourself, contort yourself into a person that is only interested in the same stuff that other people are interested in, even if that's a thing that you don't feel comfortable around.
I'm kind of thinking back to, I'm trying to make a connection to something that we were talking about earlier with, parents not teaching us how to make requests because they're making the demands, which then leads into that being the only way we know to ask for things as adults, which then gets us into relationships where it seems like we're making demands of others, or we just don't talk.
We accommodate
and we clam up and we don't say what we would like and ask of others.
So parents who lived in the generation where they didn't know really how to deal with emotions, and if you had quote unquote too much emotion, you were too sensitive, too blah blah blah, too whatever, and you were responsible for figuring out what to do with your emotions, even though we're learning more and more that parents can help with, co-regulation.
Right.
And that can be hard with parents who didn't have that co-regulation with their parents, because it's just generational trauma and a generational healing in the end, if you then kind of work on yourself and work on the co-regulation with your child, which is still hard. Again, easier said than done. But with parents who are needing to kind of like, oh my gosh, did I just lose my train of thought? Can you bring me back, Safi? God, it was like, so parents have learned across generations that
they are, this is how we behave as humans.
But we want to do really better still.
Messed up still because it's super traumatic, and there's a lot of lack of consent, a ton of lack of consent in our older generations.
Yes.
Tons and tons, which, I mean, when you think about being, like, we started out as slavers over here.
Yeah.
And I'm speaking we, as in me, the white person.
Yeah, us white people.
Like, no wonder we got trapped into victimizing everyone around us for generations.
Yep.
Like, that's what white Americans started with.
I mean, if slaver dad is gonna, like, spanking your child versus whipping the slave probably feels like a huge difference.
Right. And that is, oh man, I had written a note about this. Like, if you ever hear the words, but I'm better than I used to be, run. It is a huge red flag. If they are using that as the excuse, if they're using that as the, well, and I've lived through this. Major trigger warnings for domestic violence. Skip ahead about 30 seconds. But, I was told, oh, well, I used to nearly choke my wife to death all the time, and I nearly strangled her to death on 2 occasions, and I broke knees, and I did this and I did that. So I'm better than I used to be.
Yeah, comparison-wise, since I'm better, that means that you're lucky that I'm not what I used to be.
Right. And it has no ownership over the fact that it's still a problem.
Yeah.
Like, violating people's consent doesn't really have... I mean, there are obviously things that are absolutely heinous that I don't even want to begin to, quote-unquote, compare.
Right.
But lacking consent and doing something anyway is a problem no matter what.
Right.
Doesn't matter what you violated.
And that's the thing is, so the boundary definition thing, I'll need to find the TikTok and link it. There's also a really great TikTok by a therapist about intentions. So that's the thing a lot of times people get upset about is if they cross your boundary or if they disrespect a request, they will, I'm a verbal processor, so I can empathize, but also sometimes verbal processing when someone corrects you or presents a request or boundary, verbally processing through why you're struggling to do that might not necessarily be the right time when they're struggling with the fact that you broke their consent.
Right.
But it happens all of the time and it's usually around intentions. And that's usually what happens with parents is, you'll be like, hey, you remember when I was this old and like you said this thing and it really hurt me. And then parents will be like, well, my intention was this. You didn't understand the intention. It's not my fault.
Right.
That you
so
don't
deal
understand.
with it.
Yeah. You don't understand the intention. And
you're just ungrateful.
Yeah, basically. Or like, we did the best we could. Like, okay, yes.
We're not saying you didn't do the best you could.
I'm not saying you're a bad parent. I'm just wanting you to understand that some of the things that happened while you were doing your best and with all of the resources you had in front of you was painful for me and caused, and some of the reason as I hit my microphone, full therapy sessions about like that childhood pain that I had. And
definitely same.
Yeah. And the thing that is hard for people is like, and this is why some people like don't want to be parents, is like they know that you're not going to be perfect for your child. Like, and there's going to be pain. Like, Safriani and I love each other very much. We're not perfect for each other. Like, we aren't perfect around each other. We have, this is not parenting things, but you can't be perfect around your partner. That's just not how that works. Like, you can grow with your partner and learn more things about them, but it's not going to be perfect. And that's another thing that can lead into how we approach our relationships is like, you know, you had a past partner that would be like, well, I'm better than I used to be, when you wanted them to take responsibility for their stuff. Could have also been related to how their parents interacted with them. Like their parents didn't take responsibility for how they felt.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why the parenting, again, you're not ever going to be perfect.
There is a I need to, again, I'm going to post this in the notes. There is a research that has like, this is the percentage of how much you need to attune and like have secure attachment, healthy stuff with your child for them to create secure attachment with you.
Right.
It is a much smaller percentage than people think.
Yeah.
Like, and I think it's less than 50%. It's less than 40%.
The biggest thing is apologize when you make a mistake. If you do that one simple thing and you genuinely mean the apology and you work to do better, then it's gonna be okay, as long as it's not like massive, again, consent violations. Like, you're gonna do things that other people don't like because you're not them, and you can't be inside their head all the time knowing what they would want in any given moment, and you might want something else, and that's okay because you're your own individual. And I think that this idea of perfection, even the fact that you were bringing up the word perfection, just really struck me, because we are so attached to the idea of perfection, and that's why parents end up cracking and going way overboard, is because they want to be seen as perfect and they want their kid to be perfect.
Yep.
They don't want their kid to hurt the way that they have, so they try to hide their own pain, and they try to keep their kid from having that pain, but by doing so, force their children not to be authentic and aren't authentic themselves.
Yeah. And that's the thing that's hard too as a parent, is like, there are a lot of aware parents out there that are like, I don't want to place my anxieties on my kid. And then, super meta, being anxious about placing your anxieties on your kid may also place anxieties on your kid. But but the thing is, you know, we, due to this aspect of not really being taught boundaries and also not being taught how to be emotional, you know, there were a lot of bad emotions, or a lot of emotions that were just needing to, you were too sensitive or too competitive or too whatever.
Don't cry, swallow it.
Yeah, rub some dirt in it.
You're a big kid.
Yeah. Only babies do that. Yeah. Different things that I'm sure many people have other sayings from their parents or grandparents or family members about. But anyway, those things are going to cause kids to not be able to recognize emotions. So first they're like, see that emotion? That's a bad emotion. Don't have it around me. That, no. But then that also translates into how parents parent the kids, because they're like, oh, I'm having a bad emotion. I'm not going to tell my kid I have a bad emotion, and I'm not going to label it for them. And then that causes lack of language understanding with the kids. Like, if you're wanting to help teach your kid and be more aware of their emotions, you need to provide them with the language. And by modeling to the kid of like, oh, you know, me having tightness, I feel tightness in my shoulders, like even bringing up how you're feeling it in my body. You're like, oh, I have tightness in my shoulders and neck. This usually means that I'm like frustrated with something. So let me figure out what that means. And like kind of having that monologue in front of them and having them be curious along with you about the emotion, but not necessarily being like, I'm frustrated, I need to fix it, or I'm frustrated and this is bad,
or I'm frustrated because of you.
Yeah.
Also that.
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge thing that you and I have had to work on communicating, is sometimes I will be frustrated with the situation in general, but I know it's not you specifically. But since I'm around you and I'm just like scowling and you can tell that I'm irritated.
You're like Pippa?
Huh?
Is it Pippa?
What are we talking about?
In Kanto with the storm cloud, you're like the storm cloud part.
Yeah, but you can tell, and you're like, okay, you know, you might have like knocked something over or done this or done that accidentally. And, you know, I don't like loud sounds. I don't like spilling things. Like, those things can cause me to become more dysregulated. And so, like, we might be on a time crunch. There's just all of this stuff that's causing me to be more irritated. And I have recognized that sometimes you're like, oh no, this is me. I did this. You're making, you know, you think I'm the problem. And so sometimes you'll just straight up ask, or you're like, oh, are you okay? You seem really irritated. And I have to take a deep breath and think about all of the things that made me irritated. And I'll be like, yes, I'm irritated from these things, but they're not because of you. Like, I'm not irritated at you. But that energy for you, based on your trauma history, is hard to witness because people can just be irritated around you. And then that can also lead to abusive situations.
Right.
So, but that's also why, you know, your kids don't have to have past trauma in order for you to need to get to that state of communication level either.
Right. It's witnessing anger is scary for anyone. Mm-hmm. Witnessing sadness is heartbreaking for anyone. Yeah. Like, we tune into each other's emotions somewhat naturally, but we're not going to be as fine-tuned with it. We're not going to be able to separate it from us versus them. Mm-hmm. We're not going to be able to name it or really discuss it or even feel normal in it if it was not explored and discussed in our family system.
Yeah, and that makes it extra hard when you start to gain more awareness around emotions when you're older and you want to discuss it with your family, and then they're still in that space of not really willing to bring up those emotions. Or right. They are willing to bring up their emotions. And then this is the thing about, I'm sure people have experienced this. Many people have experienced this. And again, generationally, this is what's been passed down. But a lot of times it's like, hug grandma or else she'll be sad. Or sit up, your uncle wants you to sit on his lap and he'll be upset if you don't. And, wash the dishes with a smile on your face or else your parents, your dad might find you ungrateful for what he provided you, And so it's like, maybe, because I remember sometimes I would just be irritated and wanting to just be like, I don't like doing these things, but I'll do them, sort of thing. Like, for example, chores. Like, I hate doing chores. I still hate doing chores. Like, people who like doing chores, God bless you. Like, I don't like, and so, well, especially dishes. Like, there's certain chores that I don't mind doing. But anyway,
bless Justin
for liking to do dishes.
I don't think he likes it. I don't think he likes anything.
No,
except but D&D.
He tolerates
and us.
It. Yeah. And beer. Anyway,
okay, there's a short list.
Oh, great.
Now you're not responsible for other people's emotions.
Right. And that's the thing that also gets us caught up on setting boundaries. Because we're like, if I set a boundary, it's going to make people upset at me or judge me or, not want to be around me. In which case, if people don't want to hang out with you because of your own boundaries, those people are not great for you anyway.
Yeah. I was just thinking that if someone is disappointed in your choice and your boundaries, it means they had expectations that they had placed on what they were expecting of you, and they don't have the right to do that.
Yep.
And that's because that's them trying to draw a quote unquote boundary around you. Mm-hmm. Because they are placing this like, well, you better be doing this or I'm going to be upset with you. That's a demand. That is not a boundary. Mm-hmm. And it's an expectation. And expectations are only allowed in agreements.
Yep.
If you have agreed with somebody that this is the way that you're going to work through your career contract, you've signed on as a teacher. Okay, there are certain expectations of your job role.
Right.
If you get married, there are certain legal expectations now of your financial things being, tied up in one another. And it's an expectation that you'll probably be the executor of the estate if they die before you and things like that.
And those agreements can be amended.
Correct. So if something's really not working for you, then you can say, well, I don't agree to this anymore. And you can break the contract. And now there's not consent there.
Yeah.
But that means that the entire agreement gets shattered. So if you say no and that was a job agreement, then you might lose your job. But that's okay. You have a choice if a job isn't working for you to try and go get another job.
Yeah. And that's another thing is like with parents setting limits with their kids, you can have a discussion with your kid. With a 5-6-year-old, like young kids, you can be like, okay, here's a limit. This is why I want this limit to be a thing. Sometimes it's around screen time. Sometimes it's around like transition, like how to transition out of an activity is usually a thing that causes kids to be irritated and dysregulated. So if you are like, the way that I'm doing the transitions now with like a timer or a 5-minute warning or, I've tried all of these different things and they just don't seem to work. And you can sit down with a kid and be like, hey, so I'm noticing that we're like struggling in this thing. And I totally get that it might just be because we don't really know what works. Let's brainstorm together. Let's figure out what might work for you. And if they come up with a plan and that's not working, like it might work for a week or so, and then the kid's like, this actually isn't working. You can also preface it by being like, hey, you remember when we, drew up that agreement around that limit and you were wanting to do this? How are you feeling about it? Do you feel like it's working for you? If it's not, we can totally go back to the drawing board and change it. And I don't remember that happening a lot as a kid.
I don't remember that really happening at all as a kid.
Yeah. And it's just like, here are the limits that your parents set for you. And you're going to,
it's even interesting. Like, you might know the number better than I do.
If I probably don't, but I will try to figure out the research behind it.
Age 2 to 4, like the toddler age where there's some communication happening. And we call them all these things, the terrible 2s, the terrorsome 3s, or, whatever
they're called. Yeah.
The fearsome 4s. I'm just going to keep coming up with alliteration now.
Yep.
When one of the number one strategies for that age group is giving them a choice. Do you want to wear this shirt or this shirt?
Yeah.
That one, right? Like when you frame it as, oh, you have a choice in this. You have some power here. Because obviously we know like a 2 to 4-year-old is not going to get themselves dressed. They're not going to be able to cook their own food. Like we're a caregiver. We made that agreement when we had them and kept them. Or we gave that agreement away and helped someone else form an agreement with an adoption.
Yeah.
Like we're setting a limit because we're the caregiver, but we can still give choice and autonomy in it. And that's such a better strategy. And then when they are old enough to communicate, just like you were saying, like, what would work for you, buddy? I'm saying you're frustrated right now.
Yeah.
What's going to help you calm down? And if you get an I don't know, you sit with them for a little while and let them regulate some using your calm energy, and then they'll eventually come down. And I know someone's going to like listen to all of this and be like, ooh, but I've tried that. Like I tried sitting with my kid. Well, were you frustrated while you were sitting there trying? How often have you tried? Is it an ongoing thing? Because if you've been otherwise before, it's going to take them time to build trust back up that you're actually going to attune.
Yeah. And if it's and that's the thing too. It's like, I've seen so many videos of people working with traumatized animals, like dogs and cats, and like ones that they're like, oh, look at how much abuse that they've been. And they just sit in their cage quietly and just sit there. They just sit with the dog and like we'll give a treat over and the dog will be like slowly gaining trust back. But it's like, it's just one of those things where it's interesting that parallel, like we can sometimes accidentally like treat kids or intentionally, unfortunately, treat kids like animals. But yet I see videos of people that will like rehabilitate animals better than people realizing like their kids need that level of support as well, in terms of creating this space of, and it also means like you need your own work too. Like it's okay if you go to therapy and try to figure out some of this stuff too, or family sessions or couple sessions. Like it's just one of those things that it will all end up kind of coming together, because then you can make those connections of like your past trauma and how it's affecting you as a parent. And but like you can also build awareness amongst your entire family system, and being, you know, your kids that you're raising, your partner, your you know, all the people in the house together, to be like, here's the emotions that I'm feeling, you know. And then you can even, if you have your own self-care activity that you know you do when you're feeling a certain way, you can even state like, hey, this is my boundary. Like I'm feeling this way, and in order for me to regulate, I just need 10 minutes to do this regulating activity. And then working through that with, you know, your family. And that level of, and that's vulnerable to be able to admit that. So it's just one of those things that is going to be, again, this is not a topic that you can just do overnight.
Right.
It's a muscle that needs, I use this analogy with so many different things, because mental health stuff is different. Like, but it is like a muscle if we want to compare it to physical stuff.
Right.
You're not going to build it in 2 nights. It's going to take years. And it's going to take, you know how constant people work out in order to build those muscles?
Well, and let's think of somebody who's been physically wounded. Diamond Dallas Page comes to mind. You know, now he's this famous DDP yoga, get fit, crush it, like yoga guy. Scares the crap out of me. But I don't know exactly what his injury was, but he wrecked himself in pro wrestling, and his body fell apart.
Yeah.
It took him a long time to build back up to where he's got muscles again, and, you know, can do these exercises. Trauma, emotional trauma, mental trauma, you know, sexual trauma, religious trauma, all of those that impact more than our body, we also have to build back up, and it takes a long time to get fit again. And even if, you know, there's 2 things I wanted to remember to share before we wrap, that if you think about your kid and like, you're like, they've not had a traumatic life. Okay. First of all, you can't determine what someone else's trauma is. Second of all, there is generational trauma that we are starting to really understand scientifically, that there are biomarkers and whatnot that can be carried through family systems. And third of all, birth is fucking traumatic. Doesn't matter how you come out. That's scary as shit. Like, I want you to imagine for a moment that you are in your bed. It's dark. You know, the curtains are drawn. You're cozy. You're warm. You're having a pleasant dream.
And all of a sudden, these giant hands grab you under the shoulders, rip you through some sort of, like, all of a sudden you're wet and cold. And then...
and the lights are freaking bright, and like you gasp because you're like all stuffy and stuff, and you can't breathe. Like, that's freaking traumatic, and that's our first experience.
And people are like, "Oh, you can't remember that." Our bodies remember.
Our bodies remember that, and there is a spiritual component to that.
Oh, absolutely. Okay,
that's pre-verbal.
So yeah, so we're running out of time. If you've heard, again, we're working on creating Patreon stuff, like a forms thing in our link tree of like, if you want to submit stuff to us that you might want us to talk about, like, you know, we're working on all that stuff. So two things, or no, one thing. Yeah. One book that I want to bring up that I found wonderful for anyone who's a parent or therapist or whatever. The Whole Brain Child is so good. Helps you understand like how we have fully developed logical brains as adults. Kids have only developed emotional brains. So that helps you kind of logically understand where the kid is coming from if you're struggling to know, like, you're like, is my kid like just doing this for attention or whatever? Like, if you're starting to question those things, this book really helps. Again, we're not sponsored by this, but I just love giving out resources because it's just
share
I love
the wealth,
knowledge,
right? Like, share the knowledge. There's no reason not to.
Yeah, but yeah, boundaries.
I have so many more deep thoughts on this topic.
We might have to do a part 2. Or in part 3.
I do want to get on the recording for something that I realized later.
Oh.
That when it was 11/11 on 3/11, that was 3 11s.
Oh shit.
Heck. My mind just
Yep. So many gifs of the mind explosion. Wow. Well, that's a great way to end.
Is that how you're going to end this episode?
Probably.
Oh boy.
All right. Bye.